ଏମିତି ଦେଖିଲା ଉପରେ ଦେଖିଲା ଲାଗୁଛି ଏମିତି ଦେଖିଲେ ସିଧା ଠିକ ଲାଗୁଛି Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Unit 15, the last session of the Brand Management Program, the PBM program. Today we are looking at, in this unit, we'll be going through a concept which we've already talked about in the past, but we are talking about how to measure brand equity. Why there is a need to understand why brand equity has to be measured and how to track that particular equity and what are the different ways in which we can track it down. So we'll take a cue of some of the models which we had talked about in the past, and then we will proceed further in terms of understanding the brand equity in a little bit more entirety. Further, we will look into various methods which are generally approaches which are taken to calculate or to understand what is the brand value. So there are different approaches which are adopted by marketers. So which one is the most valid one and why should we look at it and things like that. So going forward, let's start with when we talked about brand equity, as you can understand, we looked at brand equity as a kind of a leveraging point for any brand that in the portfolio of in a brand portfolio of organization, that it can create more value to the consumer as well as to the organization. When we talk about the organization benefits in terms of financial terms, obviously, because when you're looking at brands which are delivering and they are able to garner the kind of revenues, it has a very direct impact on the profitability of the organization. So obviously, organizations are very, very critical, or they're very, very important. I mean, feel it important to measure how this particular equity that the brand has, or what kind of when the brands are being brought in, how they are proceeding in the marketplace, how are they gaining market shares, how are they connecting with the customers. End of the day, what is the impact on the bottom line? Because as you can see, building brands, and not only in once, but it is a continuous process. Building a brand, nurturing a brand, looking into its future capacity to grow. When we look at those parameters, a lot of investment has gone into it. And of course, whenever there is an investment, obviously, we always look at it from a business perspective in terms of what could be the outcomes. Is it a desired outcome, or is it something which has deviated from our stated course? So what is it that creates that particular engagement to be more profitable? Wherever, of course, where we find that the brand is not able to deliver value or not able to give the revenues which it had stood for, obviously we need to revamp it. We need to relook at it. We need to revitalize it. We have already looked at those concepts. So today, when we say that, is there a need to understand, is there a need to measure the equity that the brand has, any brand that we have in the portfolio? Perhaps yes, because as brand managers or as marketers, as we're investing more into the brands, we look into whether that brand is going to sustain in future, whether it is going to impact our the performance dimensions. If you look into the brand value chain, which is a concept which is being created by Keller, you will look into that. It talks about a multiplier effect. We look into first, of course, how the products, how the brand is created, built, and then what kind of in terms of the role of the brand, in terms of the customers accepting it vis-a-vis the competition. Then comes the stakeholders, the other stakeholders who are there in the intermediaries, everybody who's got a stake in that particular brand's journey are interested. Today, we are also equating it to the shareholders who are interested in the performance of your portfolio. If it's a very robust portfolio, delivering very good performance, the revenues are high, giving profitability, obviously it affects the P by E ratio, the earning per share of that particular company. So obviously it has a ramification where we talk about brand is no longer just a product or anything. It is more or less an asset, an intangible asset, which the company can leverage upon. Let's look at what are the thrust areas. When we look into brand equity, we always say that one of the key factors in brand equity is brand resides in the hearts and soul of their consumers, because they are the biggest beneficiaries. Unless they relate to you, unless they relate to your brands, unless they resonate with your brands, they find it relevant and do not convert and keep that thing going. Obviously, all that we are talking about in terms of revenues and market shares and all that does not sound right? So it does not hit the bell. So one has to also understand as marketers that as a brand manager, how is my brand connecting emotionally with the consumers today? When you talk about emotional connect, we also look into the functional connection also. So there are brands at which attend to multiple needs of the customer. So some of them attend to the functionality, some of them look into the emotional aspect or the spiritual aspect of the brand as we move on. So today the extendability of a brand also has been brought into future, looking at the future perspective of how the brand should be managed, because we are looking into future earnings that could accrue by formulating a strategy for the brand which will stay on as long as we can in the marketplace and should not get weeded away. So brand managers have a tough challenge in their hands, how to suitably not only create brands, nurture brands, but also sustain the brands in the long run. But when we look into the consumer connect, we look into whether you talk about the Keller's model, whether you talk about the Acker model, one thing is certain, as I told you, the consumer is at the helm of the affairs, that how are they connecting with the brands. So I'm going to take a example of David Acker model, as you can see it in the screens, which was suggested that you look into the following kind of parameters where these components help in garnering brand equity. So they are the sources where we can get brand equity. So what are the sources? The brand awareness, the perceived quality, the brand associations, the loyalty factors, and some of the proprietary assets. Proprietary assets we're not going to touch upon, but obviously the other four which we're talking about needs a kind of a measurement today. Because when we look into the measuring the brand equity, the first thing, whether it is in the Keller's model or in the Acker's model, we always talked about how to enhance the brand knowledge. Brand knowledge comes from how the brand is creating awareness. Now, it is important, as you can see in this hierarchy in the pyramidal structure here, the levels of brand awareness starts from brand recognition to recall to top of the mind recall. Now, understand, merely recognizing a brand does not mean that it's going to be a kind of a value to the customer. It could happen that you have been exposed to the brand through some media or the other, but the real thing comes about is that when you are using the brand, and if you are happy with the usage, and when you go to purchase, are you recalling the brand? So when you talk about the recall factor, the recall factor can be divided into two parts. One is called the unaided recall. The other one is called the aided recall. Marketers, brand managers need to understand this, very, very important, because just recognition of a brand through a logo, through the brand elements to which they are projecting in mass media is fine. It's obviously, it gives certain amount of information, but as a marketer, I would like to take this stuff further. Is how is this brand is basically creating a positive vibe with the consumer, so that the loyalty factor is there. They're coming back to me again and again, and so on and so forth. So if you look into the unaided recall, so if you're using a brand, perhaps the aided recall factor is there. But when we use mass marketing communication strategies, one of the key factors is that it is to create a pull factor. We talk about push-pull factor, we talk about a pull factor. Now here, the critical thing is when we look into media coverage in terms of brand communication, we always try to achieve something called the reach factor. And of course, there's a frequency, number of times that we repeat the brand communication so that it registers well and achieves the recall factor better. You must have seen traditional methods of communication or marketing communication, but today we also have non-traditional methods, digital methods. Everywhere the idea is to create more visibility for the brand so that the brand can be recalled. For example, if I ask you what are the brands that comes to your mind when you talk about let's say shirts, the brand that comes to you mind without any kind of aid, right? Um, with any kind of intervention from the marketer side, they would say, okay, top 5 brands are these. Whichever brand comes up is called the unaided recall. That means you're not aiding in the recall of the brand. So it may happen that the person has used the brand, is more aware of the brand, has got a positive referral from somebody else, and that is what is playing an important role in the awareness. And it's a very spontaneous kind of a thing. For example, as you can see here, there's an example given with respect to Alan Solly. As you can see here, out of 600 respondents, 390 people respondents gave a unaided recall. That means it featured without any kind of a prompting from the brand manager in terms of the recall of the brand. As a result, what happened? People felt that okay, Alan Solly has got an unaided recall of something like a 65%. Now, what is the aided recall? Sometimes it happens, obviously all brands do not enjoy this kind of a scenario. So what needs to be done is that further it needs to be strongly associated with the customer in terms of their awareness front. So what they need to do, some kind of intervention. Maybe you try to say that, do you know about Alan Solly? So that's the next part of the experiment where they ask that out of these these 600, out of 390 people, they spontaneously named Alan Solly. To others who did not respond, they asked that, okay, would you know about a brand called Alan Solly? So maybe say 120 is the example, which is the number which has been given here according to the example. And after 120 only would say. So what would be the aided recall? It is like I'm aiding that process that, do you know about this brand? And then they say, oh, I know about this brand. So let's say 120 of them say. So it's about 20% of them. So what would be the total brand awareness? Both the aided as well as unaided. That would be 65% and the 25%. That would make it 85%. So, for example, but the critical thing that we must look into is that unaided recall has got a stronger awareness compared to the aided, because in aided we are trying to aid the recall process. So for a marketer where we are getting a unaided recall, that's definitely an important thing. The next thing is what we achieve top of the mind. In terms of the top of the mind, if you remember, we talked about in the past sessions, when we talked about top of the mind, any one single brand that comes to your mind and you don't look at any other brand. When you talk about, let's say, cola drink, Coke or Pepsi achieves the top one. So that kind of a thing is, let's say, is the top of the mind. That means you don't consider any other brand but this. This could also show that, okay, perhaps you're using the brand, you're happy with it. There can be many other factors which needs a deep dive understanding into whether this awareness is because of just a top of the mind awareness, or is there something else? So in this exercise, again, they found out that out of this 390 who mentioned, Alan Solly spontaneously, 200 of them mentioned Alan Solly as the first before listing any other brand. So in their list of recall, they put this brand at the top of the list. So when you're putting it at the top of the list, obviously it talks about a very strong kind of a recall, which that means around, if you say 200 out of 60, that is 33% of your respondents have a very strong top of the mind. That means they don't think of anything else other than that. 85 unaided, they record it. Others, they require some kind of an intervention. So when we look into it, you always try, from a brand perspective, obviously we want the brand to achieve this 33%, because that is a very critical indicator that maybe that guy is not, or the consumer is not looking at any other brand. It means somewhere down the line there has been some kind of a usage, some kind of a better acceptance in terms of the brand. So we need to look at it continuously, that what is the absolute amount of percentage of innate recall which leads to top of the mind awareness. So obviously it has to be the brand manager to consistently, continuously track the change in brand awareness, and also they have to look into their key competitors. How are they competing against the other competitors in the marketplace, and does this lead to a purchase intention, a kind of decision to go for a purchase. Let's look into the other parameters of sources of brand according to David Acker. We talked about something called perceived quality, if you remember. Perceived quality, when we talk about it, how does the consumer perceive the quality of, or the consumer perceive about that quality factor? It could be because of its usage, they have used it, or some other alternatives, or some kind of a engagement that the consumer have had with the product or the brand, as a result of which they are able to perceive a better quality. It does not talk about the manufacturers factoring the quality of the product or the manufacturing quality. It talks about basically the perception of consumers regarding the quality that has been given to them in terms of how the brand has engaged with them. Right? So there is it can be measured through satisfaction surveys. It can also be done through the various performance ratings which are given. Again, perceptual studies which are carried out from time and again. And which are another indicator is the current usage. How people are, if you see the market share figures, they will tell you that, okay, currently so people are using it. So obviously that is again a indicator of perceived quality. Of course, their intention to use is also looked upon in terms of referrals which come in as a part of this perceived quality. Not only they, but their friends and others who they are able to influence. So intention to use is a critical factor, is because purchase intention is something which helps the consumer perceive the quality aspects of a brand in a much more detailed manner than any other thing. Next, we look into the associations, like what kind of network of positive orientation or the positive images that the brand tries to elicit in the minds of the consumer. Now, this happens primarily due to various communication, the usage, the various aspects. So what is that creates this brand association? Suppose say that a particular brand is positive for me or negative. Those associations come from the various brand elements that we had talked about in the sessions earlier, that the way we had communicated to them, did it really register or did it not register? What is it that registered, and how do we measure, how do we create better association, brand imagery with our brands? So there are few procedures which can be done in order to elicit that. One is called the free association, where it's a we are giving kind of a open kind of situation to the consumers, to how do they associate with them, how do they look at the brand. They're giving sentence construction or sentence, I like so brand because whatever, I like this because, or they have to give some kind of a sense. It's a free association, and a lot of things can come out of it, that how different people can look at brands in a different manner. So obviously, some of them may not be actually conscious of that thing. They just heard something. So you may get very different, diverse kind of interpretations. But then as a brand manager, you have to be consistent to see that what your brand is being talking about, whether those things are actually resonating with the consumers or not. There can be picture interpretation. Pictures means, suppose you talk about, you can say that, what does a brand like a tire like Seat? If you see Seat has used an animal like a rhino as a logo in their logo, but today they are not doing it. Or Asian Paints use Gattu, the painted boy, in the brand promotion. But is that what is the interpretation that people? So a lot of people are asked with respect to that imagery, that what comes to your mind? Name an animal which you think this brand represents. So when you say something like example given here, that somebody may say that it's somebody may look at a product which is with a picture of a rabbit. Others may look at a cheetah or another or a horse. So that is critical because it is coming from the customer, the way they look at. But all of them are looking at something called agility, speed, strength, and so on and so forth. So when you talk about picture interpretation, these are cues which can be taken up by the advertising agencies or the creative guys when they are working on the campaigns, or they're trying to whip up the brand elements. The user, many a times you say, who is the user of this? Many example that is given here is that of Harley Davidson. I would also talk about Bajaj and Hero, which have talked about the passion of the, or Amul. It's basically passion of India, so patriotism, that kind of a thing. So if I'm Desh Ki Dhadkan kind of things, or we're talking about in case of Harley Davidson, the user is considered to be a kind of a rebel. Unfortunately, the brand is no longer there in India. It launched in India, but it's gone back. It is a brand which is very, very different from other brands. If you're talking about any other two-wheeler brands, in fact, it is not a two-wheeler brand also. It is a complete lifestyle, I would say. They create a cult, a community. If you remember, we talked about brand communities. They create a community, and where the people who are associated with that, they have very strong beliefs, and and those beliefs can be very much different from the normal people. For example, the other groups, for one of the critical things when they talk about Harley Davidson is they are rebel. They don't like staying in the conforming to the social norms. They always try to be a kind of a outlier. So if you talk to them, you may not feel the same vibe that you would talk to a normal person. So that's a very classic case of where certain brands by the user group also influences a certain kind of imagery that is associated. For example, when you talk about baby products, J&J comes in very, Johnson & Johnson comes very strongly. Though Wipro was there, we had First Cry, which has moved into the infants category. But nobody can take away that imagery that is associated with J&J. That also created a bottleneck for them. If you remember, Johnson & Johnson went into products which were not meant for the kids. Unfortunately, though the brands were good, the products were good, the brand could not sustain in the marketplace or face a real challenge in establishing themselves in the marketplace. And of course, if you look into the decision-making while talking about brand choices, you will find that how effectively the person has found a reason to go for a particular brand. You ask somebody that, okay, why did you buy this particular brand? And they give a reason as to they walk through the entire journey. You will unravel the kind of brand associations that they are. So when you talk about panel discussions or consumer panel discussions, marketers can find about these things. Another thing is the brand personality. We talked about what is the personality of a brand. When you talk about Raymond's talks about the complete man. If you see, the campaign very clearly indicates what is a desired man is, and how the person is complete as a brother, as a son, as a brother, as a very effective father, or as a teacher, or as a student, right? You'll find that the narrative which is given with the brand helps us to talk about a very responsible man. A man who has got sincerity, has got a lot of sophistication maybe, but at the same time he's very much grounded. He understands people's emotions very well, right? Sometimes we can also show him that he can take the struggle of life, the hardships. So we could talk about certain ruggedness. We'll talk about this in some time as we come back to the framework which is used for mapping the brand personality. Next, we move to the brand loyalty factors. Loyalty is a very, very key contributor to the value that the brands bring to the firm, because most of the time it is the loyalty factor which helps the brand get more revenues, right? So obviously it is known, it's a very known fact that it's very difficult to get a customer. There is certain customer acquisition cost which the marketer or a brand manager incurs. Now that cost, if the customer leaves, let's say they exhibit a brand switching behavior and they leave, then that entire cost of acquisition goes down because it's a sunk cost. So what happens is that it's very difficult to retrieve that person back into the fold and say that, okay, you can stay with us. So a lot of firms are looking now, when you're talking about loyalty, we are looking into few things. One is the person coming back to us? Is this the repeat purchase? Are they coming back to us? Are they giving referrals, positive frame of using the brand to others, and then thereby, are able to, we can maximize it. In fact, a lot of warm based, word of mouth based communication strategies have been inculcated to take care of the loyalty factors. So, three things that we talk about is a repeat purchase and a continued repeat. Continued repeat means you keep on buying, you are not exhibiting. Say, tomorrow you don't get your brands available, then you may switch. But are you again coming back? So, that talks about loyalty. The trial rate, are they even trying the new products which are coming back? If the experience has been good, they have been loyal to you. Obviously, when you're going for a trial for a new extended brands, it will definitely resonate well. As a preferred brand, are you suggesting it as a preferred brand? Whenever, anytime you purchase, your loyalty stage, if you see that the scale of loyalty is pretty large. It's not that okay, it just stays as being loyal or not being loyal. There's a complete stage in which loyalty can be studied into. So we talk about something called the RFM analysis, where we talk about firms look at this analysis to understand the loyalty factors. So, for example, recency of purchase, frequency of purchase, and the monetary value of the purchase. These are three things which they look into in terms of establishing loyalty, because loyalty will have some kind of a monetary measure in terms of measuring the loyalty. So when you say that okay, X amount of money is being purchased and it is increasing, or I'm getting more out of him, then obviously it is there. If the product is such that you are able to not go for a repeat purchase, like in consumer durables, you may not be buying every day a television. So obviously it drops down to you may be buying something else from the same space, from the same company. So when you are going for upscaling, or if you are changing your, the car, or the changing your bike and trying to upscale yourself, are you staying within the same brand or are you going to other brands? So in cars, the first time purchase is a small car maybe. But as you move up the line, as your bank capacity increases, your disposable income is increased, you would like to also upscale yourself. So is there a provision for another brand? When are you with your customer, when you are talking about and can leverage about that good experience that the person had while they had purchased the first car from you? So if that is there, of course, you must have heard of Maruti giving loyalty rewards to the consumer. It's basically a kind of a price off, but it is taken as a loyalty reward. So many people try to talk about whether it's a preferred brand. Now, if your brand has been able to associate very strongly with the kind of the brand, what the way they link with the brand, obviously there is a willingness to take up the brand as a very preferred brand, and that calls about what we call as the resonance dimensions, as what Keller looked at. Okay, now let's look at something called how do we use certain other elements of brand equity, which we have talked about in the previous sessions. We will look into one is the brand personality framework. When you talk about most of these talk about how strong is the brand. When you say how strong is the brand, it really comes from one of the critical factors, that what the brand is trying to, what kind of an image it tries to project. Because many times you find that the brand is okay, good, could be good, but I don't think I need to own this up. For example, L18 is a brand which exclusively captures the personality of a teenage girl in their offerings. So when it came up with a nail polish, initially, they looked at the attributes of a teenage girl and captured those attributes in the brand, as in the brand elements. Even in the product itself, if you see the kind of colors that they talk about, they're very different from what a Lakme would talk about. So though it comes from the same family, it may so happen though I have two brands which talks very differently to the consumers and have got different kind of a personality. So the way you humanize a brand, that helps in association, a very strong connect with the customer. So that is some work which needs to be done with respect to the brand personality, because that helps you to have a connect with your target audience. Let's look into The one of the framework which is most commonly used in the market is that of Jennifer Acker. So, for example, I talk about a brand like Woodland. What comes to your mind? What kind of a personality comes off a mind? Who is a possible user of a Woodland? Or I talk about Bata, shoes which we have, or corporate shoes that we have been using. You will find that there's a certain personality or a human-like personal traits which are related to, and it's very strongly also emphasized while you are creating the brand identity. There are two things that you should understand. When we talked about identity and image, identity is what is it's like a DNA of the brand that you are creating, which you're offering and you're communicating. It's like a currency. If you remember, I talked about brand elements as currencies that you use to communicate. Now, if that particular framework, Casper has done something called the Prism, brand identity Prism. Acker has also come up with a kind of where the soul of the brand, the essence of the brand, the internal and the external part of the brand identity. So one has to understand the identity. When we are creating that identity, we need to understand what we are trying to say, and personality plays a very, very critical role in trying to project what the brand stands for whom does it stand, because that for whom does it stand is a very, very important thing. When Titan talked about Raga series, it talked about, yes, it is meant for somebody who's looking at a watch being used as for the occasion, right? And it also germinated into an idea which later on was leveraged upon by the company in terms of coming up with a completely new SBU in form of Tanish. The watch became so essential that it could be turned into a kind of a jewelry, and then that can be signed off as a new product category where this can be done. Of course, they had a different kind of a branding associated with it. But understand, when you talk about these brands, everywhere you find about there's a personality. When you say Manyavar, talk about Manyavar, that's got a personality of a person who's on the day of his marriage has to look something different, right? So they have captured that. For that, what we do, we talk about 5D. In fact, this is a research model which Jennifer Acker has created in 1997, where she been able to find out few adjectives which can be used to express the personality of a person, and you can humanize a person. So they are spread over 5 parameters which we can use, and you can bring it into your brand personality and definitions. So if you look into it, the first one is sincerity. How sincere are you when you say that my brand is going to be very sincere in terms of that it will deliver so much, so it promises certain things. So it has to be very honest. A Dettol is an antiseptic. It cannot talk about fragrances. Lifebuoy talks about germicide, right? It does not. It creates health and those kind of takeaways. It cannot suddenly move from the health platform to some other platform. It has to always be sincere in that effort, and that needs to be showcased with the brand. Excitement, something like most of the, like Thumbs Up talks about adrenaline rush. Mountain Dew talks about डर के आगे जीत नहीं. That is, I mean, डर के आगे जीत है. That means what? There is a winning situation after you dare to take the risk. So it tries to pump up the kind of excitement that is there. Every brand does some amount of excitement in terms of, because you have to associate with the human qualities. So somewhere they talk about the emotional appeals that you need to pack in terms of, yes, you can go and get it. Nike is a very strong example of the killer instinct that they want to talk about. Just do it, right? So it talks about that it's a kind of excitement that the brand brings in when you talk about. It's a very powerful statement which relates to. So when you word those phrases or words on the kind of logo, it brings in that excitement into the brand. Competencies, obviously, you have to understand that they have to be reliable. Okay? When you talk about banks, you have to ensure that the banks have certain reliability built into it. So when you say relationship is the common thing which binds them, how the relationship is built up by the bank? It's talking about the competency factor. Some of them talk about the Citibank talks about the city never sleeps. So we are talking about 24/7 kind of a reliable service from the financial institution. Sophistication, we are talking about the lifestyle orientation, that all the premium brands that we talk about, the luxury brands that we talk about, have a certain degree of sophistication built into it in terms of design, in terms of the flair, the kind of brand endorsement that they, or the kind of celebrities who endorse. I think they try to pick on those kind of things to convey. Most of the innovative products like iPhone talks about sophistication. Let's understand that. I was talking about Woodland as a brand. When you talk about Woodland, one other thing that comes to your mind is the ruggedness. The color name wood also specifies what kind of colors that you can expect from it. So you can use this framework to build a kind of a human-like parameter into your brand personality. Next, we look into the Young and Rubicam brand asset parameter, which is called the BAP, and it has been developed by an advertising agency, Young and Rubicam, where they are talking in terms of trying to create a power grade to understand the brand equity. So what, as you can see here, there are two parameters, as I would like to take the help of this particular figure here. Figure 3, as you can see, the brand asset evaluated can be looked in from two parameters. One is called the brand strength factors, which basically talks about the differentiation and the relevance of the brand. The other one is the stature, where you're talking about what are the esteem and the knowledge factors. What is it? What the name very clearly suggests. When you talk about the brand strength, how are you differentiated from the rest? Are you able to attract the attention of the consumers by whatever you're trying to project with respect? The degree to which your brand is differentiated and creates the attention from the consumers is being factored in. Next is the relevance factor. Is it relevant to the concerned people, or they are just talking about certain benefits? Now, we have talked about it, that the customer who finds that what's in it for me, that question that is there in their mind with respect to a brand, and what's in it for me, if that is answered to a certain amount, the relevance factor has been taken care of. So based on that, you have a high or a low. So when you talk about, that's a core part of any brand. If that brand strength is not there, forget about the brand having any kind of association or connect with the consumers. The next comes, once you have done that, you also talk about the knowledge dimensions. Over a period of time, you repeatedly use it. What is the association of the esteem factor? The kind of pride that people feel by being associated with your brand. Okay, when you talk about Mercedes, obviously it carries about the kind of the appreciation that you get when you use the brand in the society. There's a certain social conformity in terms of saying that you have arrived. That gives you a feeling, okay, if I'm using a Mercedes, yes, people will appreciate. You may have an Audi, you may have this, but when you're talking about Mercedes, it talks about a class separate from the others. So it tries to drive home those esteem factors. Then comes the knowledge factor, where you're talking about what is the understanding that the consumer has. Now, the more the consumer engages with your brand, it will communicate in terms of the knowledge factor. And we have seen that how brand knowledge helps to register through the kind of responses that consumers give towards the brand in terms of being associated with the brand and repeatedly use the brand and carry this the positive vibes through their communication to others, right? So if you see here, you can look into this. There are two dimensions which we can put your brands into these 4 buckets. Where if you see, obviously, this is the unfocused part, the unfocused in the new part. Mostly these are brands which are new to the market. They've not been able to establish maybe. So that is the new ones. But here, if you move in, you talk about being low in stature and unrealized potential. That means what the brand still has potential to be enhanced through various brand engagement programs. The 4th one, which is called the leaders, powerful leaders, is one which the power grid is always trying to talk about. But then power is something which is not a guaranteed thing for all times to come, because you are always exposed to the competitors. Competitors can come up with better substitute, can come up with better innovated brands. So is your brand able to keep up with the current requirements, the current demands and taste and preferences of the customers? Otherwise, some of the powerful brands, if they have been, like in case of Nokia, they were very much sure that they would not look at the emerging trends which are coming up. As a result, they found that their brand image got eroded, and they might slip into the strength factors getting eroded, and so much so that the brand got acquired by Microsoft later on. So the BAF talks about power grid in this way. If you see here, there's an example given with respect to water bottles, bottled water. As you can see here, if you can see the various brands which are there, some of the brands these are critically, those which are in the fourth one. As you can see here in the power leaders, they have been able to strongly being able to connect with the customers in terms of the knowledge, in terms of the differentiation, in terms of relevance. But there are some brands which are not there. So if you can see these brands, there is a lot of work to be done for Baileys to really move into a powerful. Obviously, this is the most desired quadrant to be with. Moving on to the brand manager, when we look into the report card, this is a part of a brand audit exercise that where tells you that the health of the brand. Like we have a report card for ourselves, we give examinations, we see how it is done. So for a brand manager, it is also important that they must look into how the brand is performing, what are their strengths, and how it is performing in terms of connecting with the customers, in terms of financially being viable, and so that they can build on the credibility that the brand has built. So few things, a brand report card has been developed by Keller in 2000, as you can see it here. And they say when you talk about building strong brands, it should essentially have these 10 parameters as their characteristics. Otherwise, your brands will not be considered to be a strong brand according to the brand report. So a lot of questions are asked to the respondents in terms of understanding this. Like for example, the first one, the brand excels at delivering benefits that the customers truly desire. Obviously, we got to look into the relevancy factor. Does the customer really see the benefit? So you need to call out this information. Are they still relevant? Some of the brands, like for example, Bernal, have lost their relevancy, and hence they moved from being a cream for burns to an antiseptic cream or a multi-purpose cream. So they had to pitch in with a lot of changes in there in terms of packaging, but the brand name cannot be changed. So Bernal is still there. So that could be a stumbling block for them. So when you are branding today, you need to brand it in such a manner so that going forward you can extend, or when you look into the scope of the brand, that is more possible in terms of future potentials. Pricing strategies based on consumer perception of value. That's very true, because if you're talking about a premium brand today, which is perceived to be a premium brand, obviously you cannot price it low when you're bringing it to the marketplace. Just think about it. Volkswagen or Mercedes going for a low price strategy to launch a low price variant in the marketplace. In the name of it cannot happen, because people's perception of value is linked with the pricing strategy, which it had followed in the past. And of course, the brand's positioning is related to the brand image. Positioning is one of the most important part of any branding exercise, because it's the positioning which tells us whether the identity that the brand is coming up with is that being reciprocated in terms of the image. Because when you talk about identity and image, identity is before what the brand is sending, and image is what the people are perceiving. So, and the connecting dot is the positioning. So the brand positioning has been true to its objectives, has been able to meet that requirement. They will be able to translate that entire identity into the image factor, right? And of course, it has to be consistent. The message has to be consistent. It cannot change from one plan to another. The themes cannot change over. It needs to consolidate, grow more, assure more, and be more reliable as a brand, right? And of course, the brand portfolio has to be. When you look into brand portfolio, we need to, today the brands no longer are restricted to their own products. They could be going vertically down in terms of their product categories, or they could product lines, or they could be going to other product categories. And that's how you would leverage on having such equitable status of your brands, which are strong brands. And of course, when these brands become strong, they have to be properly supported by various marketing mix elements, whether it is a distribution chat strategy, whether it's a service support, the user experience, the kind of communication that you do, what kind of environment you create when person is coming and buying, and all those kind of parameters which the entire marketing strategy talks about. So it's a complete 360-degree approach to support the brand in terms of registering strongly with the target audience. And of course, what does a brand mean to consumers? I've already talked about that. When you're talking about, if the customer or the consumer does not desire your brand, if they don't get which is relevant, and if they don't see that you are true to what you have been promising, obviously this is going to be a problematic thing. And brand is given support, and it is sustained in the long run. Okay, you talk about brands which are sustained for decades. Do you think it has just happened like that? Yes, they have got a positive vibe with the consumers, but they have also been equally supported by the various intermediaries, the people at large, the management at large, who have created a lot of, I would say, investments or interventions to be visible in that space. Second and last but not the least what are the sources of brand equity? Just now we talked about one of the models which we talked about, where other sources of brand equity can come from. The brand awareness, the kind of perceived quality, the kind of everywhere you find the objective is to create recognition, recall factor, make the person use, engage the customer. Today we are talking about brand co-creation abilities like the IKEA, where you are involved in that process of creating what the product is. As a result, you are engaging with the customer and establishing very strong relationship. Then only you'll find that the brand equity is established, and you have to be very true to that. We are no longer talking about conning someone. We are talking about how realistic are we, and do we understand what the consumer needs from us. So brand managers need to be consistently talk about in terms of parameters, that where the consumers should be asked, like in this case, the report card can score on these parameters on a scale of 1 to 10, but then whether it is good or poor, you can rate it, and you can find out where does the brand lie in terms of the. So a brand report card is an essential thing. It's like a health card, whether the brand is actually being successful. Now, when we now move to the last section of brand valuation. Why brand needs valuation? Does a brand have a value? Does it need to be quantified? The answer is yes. Today, when you're talking into your portfolio, you've got a portfolio of brands. You should know what is the financial value of a brand. Today, the brands are assets, but what is that asset worth? It's an intangible asset, obviously. But what is the worth of what is the financial value? Today, when Thumbs Up was purchased by Coca-Cola in 1996, when they re-entered Indian market, obviously fine, that was an acquisition that they did, but Ramesh Chauhan, the Parle Group, Palo Agro Products, obviously had to be given some kind of a compensation, but then on what basis? When Flipkart was acquired by your Walmart for $13 billion, 13 point some odd $billion. What makes that particular brand value of Flipkart acceptable, where the company which is acquiring it is ready to shell out huge sums of money to the tune of billions and billions of dollars, millions of dollars, crores, right, to make that brand a part of their system, a part of their things. There are brands which are very good, like in case of Imami, they purchased brands which were bigger than them, like the Himani brand. It was bigger than them, but they were facing some challenges. As a result of it, they bought it and made it far more stronger in terms of their portfolio. If you see the architecture of Imami today, they have diversified into multiple kind of product categories. And one of the key factors which has strengthened their brand at a pan-India level has been the acquisition of Himani into their fold. So obviously, because when you talk about brand valuation, there are various kind of approaches which are there. It tells us how valuable these brands are. What is the capacity of these brands to deliver more revenues? From an organization point of view, when we look at it, we need to have brands which, when you say brand value, this brand should have the capacity to not only be marketable in a given market, but also should resonate with the customers, should have the people accepting it, and secondly, it should also justify that whatever investments are being made, it's also there is a return on investment parameter, because obviously when we are in the business, we are looking into that part very importantly. So how this asset is assuring of future cash flows or future earnings, profitability from the marketplace. So we talk about it sets, when you talk about these things, the critical factors, like it's, when you talk about the brand valuation, is critical because it helps us to give us a direction. Interbrand, which does phenomenal work in terms of creating brand value, helps us to identify it gives a direction. It talks about how the brand is growing, how agile are these brands, and how people are participating in the entire thing. If you look into the asset market study by Tascali, talked about the intangible asset of brand value. In 1985, it was found that according to this study by Tabassoli in 2020, they found that in the S&P 500 firms, the market value contributed by intangible assets was only 13%. But in 1985, but in case of 2020, the market value of these through the intangible assets, which brand value is an intangible asset and is contributes to, is about 90%. So when brands are an intangible asset which contributes so significantly to the market value of a firm, obviously it's a wake-up call. Obviously they look into how to have, so that also spells out why we need to have a very robust brand portfolio consisting of very strong brands which have very strong values, where you can find out that the equity is very strong and that can register and have strength to fight back the competition. We will look into the methods which are used. There are, in fact, if you see, there is no significant conclusion drawn as to what should be the valuation method that can be used for understanding the brand value. Because obviously we look into how the brand is connecting, what is its esteem, what is its current status, what is its potential to, what has been the past investments that have gone into it, what is the current capacity to generate that revenue, and in the future. So many people look at it in a much more different ways. So different methods are worked out. As you can see here, there's a cost-based method of valuation where we talk about historical, replacement, market value. Historical, obviously the name suggests that the past investments that has been used in building the value is basically the context in which the brand value is calculated. But it's not a very robust way of looking at things, because obviously the past is never a clear indicator. Yes, it talks about how the brand has grown, but it does not tell you what is its capacity to be more beneficial in the future. Replacement, suppose you talk about, you don't brand the product, and let's say to the Flipkart example which was there, if the Flipkart brand is built today, what will be the revenue it will earn? Because this brand has been in the past and has created something. So if you replace it by another brand today and you're starting now, what will be the kind of investment that you can, what will be its value that you can estimate by looking into the investment today? Again, this talks about the competitive scenario. The competition then and competition now are two different. Market scenarios change dramatically, so obviously you cannot draw a parallels. Market value-based approach talks in terms of the differential profits that comes from branded versus non-branded. Something which was non-branded, a category which was not branded, how much revenue it has earned, and a brand which is a branded thing, how much it has earned. So you will find that obviously in case of the branded thing, the could be better. And but then it talks about the current scenario. It does not talk about the future perspective or the future strength of that particular capacity of the brand to give more value. Income based, as you can see here, what is the capacity or the contribution that comes from in terms of the income factor of a which talks about, we talk about a discounted cash flow method, where we talk in terms of what can we predict as the future capacity to based on current parameters, or let's say the 5 years or 10 years, how the brand has been looked. It is an important thing. I'm not saying that income-based methods are redundant. They are important. But what they fail is, again, it talks about the present thing. It does not talk about the other factors which are critical. If you remember, we talked about the intangible components of branding. Brand is an intangible asset to you. So what is the value that you have, or what is the value of that intangible component of that brand value? It does not talk about. It only talks about what is the kind of revenue it has created as of now, but it does not talk about what could be accruing from the intangible aspect that the brand is contributing. So it does not factor that in. So most probably people find it difficult to accept. One of the most sought after and most, I would say, a kind of valuation method which is being created by Interbrand, which is a leading brand consulting firm based out of UK. They do phenomenal work in terms of, as I've told you before, in calculating the brand value, where they have looked into various aspects. They have looked into the financial analysis and the contribution. They have also looked into the how the brand is engaging with the customer in terms of their choices, and they also talk about a strength, how they are competitive in terms of the competitive sphere. What is the strength of the brand, and what is its capacity to demand a premium from the market, right? So if you can see here broadly, it can be looked upon from three parameters. One is called the economic earnings, right? The obviously the financial aspect of this. Secondly, we look into the role of brand index, which is basically the contribution of how it contributes towards the earnings. And of course, we are looking into the parameter of future brand strength, the brand strength factor, which I was talking about, that how strong is your brand. So it talks about brand value can be created. Of course, this is a proprietary valuation method, is not there in the public domain. So you will not get so easily information. So you need to dovetail into the processes. Maybe you can go to the brandchannel.com. There are several articles which have been given in terms of how to derive this. So what it does say is that what is your earning from your intangibles? It talks about this, into the role of branding index and the discounting factor. This is a financial factor which mostly people have been talking about. So when you talk about these, you will find out the brand valuation. So you have to multiply these parameters to come to a brand value. So the first strength, as you can see here, is basically the economic value added, okay, which is basically the intangible component which is created. This can be calculated by subtracting the cost of capital from the total earnings. So this is a financial aspect to it. But what is the contribution from the intangible is calculated from the role of brand index. Because I talked to you that financial aspect is fine, but you also need to take into account the intangible earnings which is coming, and that happens because of the kind of engagement that the brand has with the consumer. So that is what is the role of brand index, where the RBI can be calculated across various industries. An example has been given here. For example, you can be low from 10% of the bulk chemicals to as high as 80 to 90%. So depending upon which industry you are relating it from, the role of brand in that particular industry will spell out how the brand. So somewhere down the line, you're talking in terms of how the brand is being purchased. What is the market share? What is the kind of people are associated with the brand? So this is a very critical indicator in terms of how that brand is performing in that particular given industry. The third part is, of course, the brand strength score, which talks about how the brand can be, because understand, we are full of uncertainty. So how the future cash flows can accrue to us is because of the brand strength score. What is the capability of the brand to generate future values? So when we talk about the net present value of future earnings, it has to be discounted. Now that discounted factor is obviously when you multiply it with the brand strength score, it will give you the total brand strength score, because the discounted factor is obviously there could be fluctuations in the profits, and then As you go further, when we talk about net present value, obviously there is a discounted factor. A brand would not remain the same. We see in the product life cycle, the product would reach a crescendo, may reach a peak, and then it tries to struggle. So the way a brand gets discounted over a period of time, that factor has to be taken into account while calculating the net present value multiplied by the brand strength. How is the brand strength score worked out? It's based on these 7 parameters: the market potential, the stability of the brand. Is the brand a leader? In how many geographical locations is it a leader? Does it have a global footprint? Does it have a growth trend? Does it have the support in terms of the brand elements? How people are relating it to it? Are you creating in terms of the intermediaries, the joint ventures? Are people are coming forward to establish strong connect with your brand? And last but not the least, is your brand legally protected? If you do not have legal protection, obviously you may have the best of the brands, but it would lose its connection in terms of the strength. So these are the 7 parameters, but all are not in the same weightage. So there has to be a weighted average which needs to be done, and a score has to be worked out based on which the score is worked out. And it basically talks in terms of what is the brand weight, how it dominates the market, and you can derive out of it. What is the weight? What is the total number of product categories, customer categories we are catering to? Are we a global presence? Are we reaching out to every possible nook and corner of the market? What kind of target segments we've been able to cover? Then we talk about the stretch. What kind of products fit into it? Is it a big extendable thing, or is it just a small? Or if you have leveraged on particular thing, have you specialized in certain product categories? And then comes the strength of your relationship, which is basically a loyalty factor, which we try to bring in. All these parameters are used for calculating the brand value, as we have seen it. So interbrand approach is the most comprehensive method for calculating the brand value, looking into the financial aspect as well as the brand strength score, as well as the indicate the capacity of the brand in terms of an index which we call as the brand score index, right? So with this we can see here this is a list of interbrand for Indian brands. As you can see here, this was a figure which came in 2014, and the figures which have been given here, the brand values are given in 2019. So we'll find that there's a certain change which has happened. In some cases, it's been a positive change. In some cases, it has been negative. Now, the erosion of brand value can happen upon what kind of decisions that the company is taking with respect to your brands, whether it's a corporate brand or the product brands, going into the future. Some of them get a brickbat, some of them do not get, some get very good acceptance, and you can see that the percentage change tells you what is the brand value today. So suppose today you were to acquire this brand, how much would you be actually selling out to own this brand? Okay. With this, I would like to conclude today's session. With this, we come to the closure of the PBM session. We have seen in today's session what is brand equity, why it needs to be measured, what are the different things that goes into brand equity, and understanding the importance of brand valuation and various approaches which are there. There's no particular thing, but interbrand approach is considered to be one of the most comprehensive method for calculating the brand value. With this, I would like to conclude this particular course. Thank you for your time.